and whom you see remain here. If you're speaking at another group and wish some of us to come for support, please write the information on the sheet on the bulletin board. At this time, please help me welcome our main speaker tonight, Tim.
Thank you. My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic. I'm honored to be here at the Atlantic Group. Thank you for having me. I've always admired this group, its structure, and its enthusiastic membership. Although this is always a little nerve-wracking. Looking around this beautiful church, I guess I can't use any of the bad words I was planning to use tonight. So I am so grateful to this program with Alcoholics Anonymous because I haven't had to take a drink since September 7th, 8th, and 9th, 1989. And I don't remember a whole lot about that last run, except it was pretty typical for me. Went out for a couple of drinks after work and ended up 2 days later. And that's what I remember is September the 9th and waking up to that nightmare and that awful realization that it happened again. And being in so much pain that day that for the first time in my life I was able to ask for help, and I have been getting help ever since. I was born the third of 4 kids in an Irish Catholic family, which doesn't qualify me to be here, but I'm told I wasn't a deterrent either. I have no excuses. My parents did the best they could with what they had, and believe me, they had their hands full with me. But I used to think it was important to tell you that my father was an alcoholic and that I came from a dysfunctional family, as if it almost gave you the understanding as to why I'm here and maybe why I drank, and I don't feel that way at all today. I needed to get sober in Alcoholics Anonymous and clear up to realize that nobody ever forced a drink down my throat. I always seemed to make that decision all by myself every time. And while I said that I wasn't going to be like my father, that turned out to be true, because I became much worse than my father ever was and hurt a lot more people than he ever did. So for me to even consider that he's partly responsible for my problems, to me, is ridiculous. And as far as being from a dysfunctional family, it's very clear to me today that I was the most dysfunctional kid in my clan, because I was a kid that could not sit still, and enough was never enough right from the start. And it caused me a lot of problems, especially at home and at school. And I used to think it was important also to tell you how mean and nasty those nuns in Catholic grammar school treated me, as if that led me to a life of destruction. Until somebody came up to me after a meeting one night and said, you know, perhaps they weren't too thrilled with you either. And I never considered that, and never considered, of course, the thoughts or feelings of anyone other than myself. I had a pretty normal childhood. There's probably 2 things that I can take out of my childhood that may apply to my alcoholism today. One, I've always seemed to have this type A personality that I see so prevalent in the rooms of AA, you know. And I don't know what the clinical definition of that is. I just know for me it's that we seem to have to go through life at about 98 miles an hour. And we can do perfectly fine at about 55. You know, we have this death grip on life that we're controlling all the pieces, only to crash and burn in the end and realize that that way of living failed us. The other thing is that from my earliest recollection, I've always seemed to have this little problem with authority. And when I became old enough to become defiant, I became defiant and stayed that way for as long as I can remember. It started with my parents, it went to teachers, coaches, counselors. And as I grew up, it progressed, it went to police officers, judges, and lawyers. And we all know God has a wonderful sense of humor. I ended up marrying a lawyer and having an argument since. It was during this time that I transferred out of the Catholic school system and onto the public school system, which is the alcoholic's way of telling you I was thrown out. And, it was on to high school, and kind of where the fun begins for me. There's 2 memories that I can immediately take from high school. 1, sports, 2, drinking. Unfortunately, missing from that is my academic achievements. It's because there were none. It was very clear and defined what my priorities were in high school, because I never missed practice playing 3 sports, and I never went to class. And honestly, if it weren't for a few sympathetic coaches going back for me at the end, I think I'd still be trying to get out of high school as a 45-year-old senior. It was during this time that I think this huge ego was born, you know, probably because of some success in sports, and it just seemed to keep growing every year, you know. Of course, today I don't have that ego anymore. It's been replaced by a tremendous amount of humility from Alcoholics Anonymous. But it was during my freshman year of high school that I got my first drunk. You know, I dabbled in drinking before that, spilled half of it, faked it. But it was during a hot summer afternoon after a doubleheader playing American Legion ball. We went back to that bar, that dingy bar after this game, Sat down at the table, they started serving pitchers of beer, and this is where the love affair with bars began for me, because from that moment on, every time in between, right up to the end, that's where I did my drinking, that's where I felt comfortable, in bars. And it also began that love affair with alcohol, and this was like love at first sight, because I was immediately ambushed by alcohol, and from that moment on, it became the most important thing in my life, and everything else took a back seat. The effect that that stuff had on me is indescribable to other people, not to you guys. But if my responsibilities and my academics were unimportant to me at this point, they became even worse with the introduction of alcohol, because that became paramount. But I did manage to escape high school, and I started to attend a local college for the simple reason that my best friend's mother was in the admissions department. And, the drinking began its progression. And at this time, a bunch of my friends were getting into the beverage industry. Everybody was getting soda routes at this time. This was like the thing to do, and I still had some connections. So this is what I did. And I'm going to, rather than bore you with my whole career path, because it's pretty boring and pretty typical, I'm going to tell you that I got into the beverage industry back then, and frankly have been in it ever since. And I have experienced the typical alcoholic ups and downs of a career, many opportunities, many blown opportunities, many job firings. Some success always followed by failure. And I continue today to be in that industry, only in a different capacity, more of an ownership capacity, with an opportunity that I could have never, ever had without Alcoholics Anonymous giving me things back like trust, reliability, integrity, things that are real important to a career. And so what I'd rather tell you about is all the undetected insanity that went on in my life that, I was completely oblivious to. The kinds of things that separate us from normal people, They seem to have events that happen in their lives, and they learn from their mistakes, they stop doing certain behaviors, they move on. With me and people like us, we just blow right by these road signs like they weren't even there, and, I did the same things. Like blackouts, for instance. Nobody could have ever told me that I was a blackout drinker when I was out there. I knew that there were some gray areas, I knew there were some blanks that maybe needed to be filled in here and there, but we didn't have a name for that. And I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and realized, my God, I had so many blackouts. And I realized I used to take unplanned excursions in blackouts. I went out for a couple of drinks in New York one afternoon and ended up at a dog track in Florida without a clue. And I don't even like dogs. I got into a nasty fight in the blackout one night, and the only two things that I remember was that it was Super Bowl Sunday and it happened in Pelham, New York. And that Monday, I woke up, looked in the mirror in the bathroom, my eye was out to here, I had a fat lip, which wasn't so unusual for me back then. What really bothered me was that I had a scar across my chest from my shoulder to my hip, and I was baffled by this. And I'm thinking, what was I out with Zorro last night or something? Was I with Edward Scissorhands or what? And, right then and there, I could have learned something, and if I was a normal person, I got to cut down, I'm lucky I'm alive, I'm lucky something worse didn't happen. Or at the very least, I need to stay out of Pelham. Instead, I rounded up three of the biggest guys that I could find, and I went searching for the perpetrators of this heinous act because I was the victim here. And in fact, I was a great victim. I stayed the victim for about 15 years. Anything that ever happened, I was victimized by it, completely. So you can imagine me going bar to bar in Pelham going, was I here last night? Was there a fight? And was I in the fight? I guess I mention this because anger, rage, fighting, a big part of my alcoholism. It's all over my track record. For as far back as I can remember, I had this burning knot of anger in my stomach. And sometimes the alcohol would calm it down, and other times it would just ignite it, and I never knew what it was going to be or where it was going to take me. But in the beginning it was kind of fun, these little barroom brawls, kind of like the rock and soccer robots, I got into a fight in a local bar one night, and somebody must have called the police, because when I chased this guy out the front door, there was a police car sitting there, and he jumped into the back seat, and like an idiot, I jumped in right on top of him. And the cop simply walked up to the car, shut the door, and drove us all to jail. Probably the easiest arrest the man ever made. But, they passed the hat at the bar, collected $200, came down, bailed me out, I was back in the bar in an hour. Ha ha, nothing learned there. The insanity continued to go undetected. Unfortunately, the fun part of it left, and it got worse, and the anger and rage got worse, and the violence got worse. And I got into a fight outside of a bar in Washmont one night with an off-duty police officer who was attempting to arrest me for possession of a controlled substance, which I happened to be in possession of. But I made the decision at the time that I was going to hit him and run, unaware that the Larchmont SWAT team had been deployed, and it got ugly and it got violent, and the bottom line is that the officer required medical attention and I required an attorney. And for the next 6 to 8 months, the threat of jail was hanging over my head, and when the ruling came down that I would be placed on probation, it was party time again, no lessons learned, and I just kept going with the insanity. And this kind of behavior affected every aspect of my life, everything. And my responsibilities were not there. Everything was geared towards alcohol and the consumption of alcohol. I must have moved 10 times in 10 years. I was always one step ahead of the landlord, one step ahead of the IRS, although they eventually caught up to me. I had this apartment, to tell you the kind of denial I was in. I came home one night, there's an eviction notice on my door. I go into the apartment, I've got no lights, no heat, no running water, and I'm sitting there reading this eviction notice with a flashlight and thinking, they're bluffing. They weren't bluffing. I came to learn that they were never bluffing, you know. And I wouldn't quite get that until I would show up at home and see my furniture in the street and maybe suspect then that, you know, these people mean business. The same story with every relationship I've ever had. I couldn't stay in them, I couldn't keep them, I couldn't be honest, and I couldn't be trusted, so how could I have a relationship? But you know, you're going through this insane life, and every once in a while, you have these up periods, you know, like it says in the big book, you know, sometimes we build a little structure around ourselves, eventually pulling it down on top of us. And I thought I had it together for a while here, and I met this girl, and we moved into this little apartment in Larchmont. And, you know, we fixed that place up. We even got a little dog and named him Max. And this was during when I'm going to become a yuppie wine connoisseur era, where I was just going to drink wine, you know. And this was, you know, we went out and bought all these nice bottles of wine. We got a little wine rack, and we were going to have wine and cheese parties, and everything was just going wonderfully. About 3 weeks' time, I had depleted that wine inventory and was on to the Carlo Rossi half-gallon twist tops. I had 2 major brawls with this girl, and she finally took that little dog and moved out on me. And one Saturday morning, I wrecked that apartment like it had never been wrecked before. I took every stitch of her clothing in that closet and threw them out the 3rd floor window of that apartment. And you can just imagine this bustling little yuppie community of Larchmont on a busy Saturday morning with clothes raining down from above. And you know the rest of the story. Police officers, landlords, evictions, the insanity continued to go undetected. Even the physical part of the insanity I was blind to. I had this problem in the end with passing out. I don't know if you guys, this has happened to you. Not to be confused with falling asleep. To me, falling asleep implies that you can be awakened. When I would pass out, I'd be gone. And there'd be no coming back until I finally came to whenever that was. And this would always seem to happen to me on dates. Probably because I only took dates to 2 places in the end. This Chinese restaurant that served the best Mai Tais in New York. After one of these things, you get that warm and fuzzy feeling all over and all your problems start to melt away. By the second one, you become very suave and very romantic. Unfortunately for me, by the 3rd or 4th, if there was going to be any romance, it was going to be while I was out, because I would go dead out at the bar. I'd wake up, of course, she would be gone, and it would be me and the rest of the Chinese contingent in this establishment. I mean, I was pathetic. I remember looking over the cash register at the football pool one time, seeing names like Lee, Quang, Wong, Timmy Martin. And the other place that I would take him, it was this Italian restaurant that served cold red wine. That's how I liked it. You know, of course, you can see my criteria for fine dining was a little skewed. And the same thing would happen. You know, after one bottle, I'd be very, very impressive at the table, you know? And unfortunately, into the second and into the third, I'd become very unimpressive because I'd become very unconscious. And on 2 separate dates with 2 separate women, I passed dead out at the table. Same waitress both times. And I remember her cleaning me up after the second incident and helping me into a cab and saying, you know, honey, you gotta do something about your drinking. And I used to love when bartenders or waiters would say something about my drinking because I had all the answers, you know. They'd say, haven't you had enough? And I'd say, no, you know, I'm looking for more than enough. Thank you very much. But all these things started to, affect my road to my bottom. But when I think about it, there's a couple of things that stand out in my mind that are pretty clear cut. One, towards the end, one set of relationships that I hadn't blown up and ruined and destroyed was with my little nieces and nephews. I cherish that relationship. I love kids, and I was Uncle Tim, and I used to take care of them, and that place was like sanctuary for me from my insane life. And I remember my sister driving with my little nieces in the back of her car one time, going past my apartment, to witness me punching the window out of my girlfriend's car in a fit of rage. She was in it at the time. And my sister told me it scared those girls really bad, and for a long time after that, they didn't look at me the same, it didn't treat me the same, and that got to me, It really made me sick of who and what I was. And it figures all the people I hurt in my life I didn't give a darn about. It took a few little kids to start to get me to open my eyes to what the problem was. And then I had this wonderful probation lady who I was supposed to go see every once a month from that little incident in March month. And I would rarely show up. When I did, I'd be in the damnedest condition, stitches over the eye, the telltale signs of alcoholism that I was oblivious to. And finally, she had seen and heard enough and recommended that unless I get some treatment, I'm going to be going to jail. It kind of got my attention, and I still tried to duck and dodge, but I agreed to go see this counselor in White Plains for alcoholism. And I remember driving up there that day, and in the car saying to myself, this guy is not getting anything out of me. I am just keeping my mouth closed. I don't have a problem as far as he's concerned. Thank you very much for your time. I walked into this man's office, sat down, and he said, Tim, what can I do for you? I said, you gotta help me, my life is a wreck. I totally cracked like an egg. My whole plan of keeping quiet and calm, I just fell out. I don't know where it came from. So obviously treatment was recommended, but I still tried to stall a little bit. After all, I was a busy man. I was being fired from a job and evicted from an apartment. I had things to do. And my girlfriend at the time, who is my wife today, a very smart lady who saw her father go through what I've gone through, wasn't going to stick around anymore. And she made it clear to me that unless I get treatment, that she was gone. And suddenly, my world was becoming smaller and smaller. I got less lies to tell and less people to tell these lies to. I'm running out of options here. And finally, after a long illness that my father had, he died. My family couldn't find me for a couple of days. I was in some girl's apartment in Brooklyn with a spoon in my nose and a bottle in my hand, just running. And finally showed up in the city and made it to the arrangements around the funeral. And this was the first time that my family had, in its entirety, had seen me and was pretty frightened in the condition that I was in. I must have been a pathetic sight, but that was the main topic of discussion there. And I remember 2 days later showing up at my sister's house with 2 garbage bags of clothes in my hand and nowhere else to go. And I said, maybe you guys are right. Maybe I do have a problem. And next thing you know, I'm in a detox for 3 or 4 days and on to rehab for 28 days. And walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, the Marriott group, and thank God I've been here ever since. And you guys know the story. You either show up here defeated enough and lost enough to ask for the help and be willing to accept the help that's given here, or you have reservations and you struggle. And I was given that gift of surrender. I had lost enough where I got a sponsor. I was taken through the steps willingly and continue to work the steps today. And I have been transformed. I have been changed on the inside, and it has changed everything. I just am very, very grateful for that. I've been catapulted into a 4th dimension of existence, as it says in the big book. And I think I understand what that means today, because although I've been sober 11 years, I drank for almost 20. And sometimes the insane life still seems more normal than the sober life, I sometimes get up early in the morning, walk into the bathroom, look in the mirror, and obviously there's no visible signs of a fight the night before. And then I start to hear these little voices coming from the other room, and I kind of come to and realize, my God, I've got 3 small kids, a wife, a home, a promising career, a life. My God, I'm a grown-up. What the hell happened, And sometimes it doesn't feel like it fits, but it's recovery, and it's real, and it has happened in my life. And it has put me on a road and a path that I've never known. I heard a newcomer ask at a beginners meeting a few weeks ago, why do people with time keep coming to meetings, And, I know for me that Alcoholics Anonymous got me sober, and I need this program to keep me sober. And frankly, I'm looking for more than just abstinence from alcohol. I'm looking for some of the promises that I was given a long time ago, and frankly, I was promised a little peace in here, and I've been given that peace and so much more that I can't really describe it to you. The other thing is that we have this disease that I've seen complacency kill us. I've seen people with time lose interest, lose focus, and go out and drink, and that's a dangerous thing. I have this disease that glorifies my past drinking, forgets about all the pain and all the suffering, and only remembers the fun and conviviality. I'll tell you what, when I think of drinking today, when the thought pops into my head about drinking, it's some glorified fantasy, and I'll tell you what mine is. I'm standing in some classy Irish bar with brass and mahogany all over the place, Guinness on tap, of course. And I'm standing at the bar, and I've got a pint in front of me, and I'm just watching that white head go down. And I'm dressed up really nice. I got a lot of money in this pocket and a pile of drugs in this pocket. And there are a number of extremely attractive women in this establishment who all seem to be enamored with me. Now, this may have never happened to me in my entire life. This is my disease's idea of my drinking. But I've learned the truth in Alcoholics Anonymous. I get that second thought today that comes almost as quickly as the first one. And that's, the lights are now flashing, it's last call. And the girls and I begin to discuss where we're going from here, because the thought of stopping and going home doesn't even enter into my head. And then the next thought that comes to me is that I'm at some sleazy after-hours joint or some apartment. The girls are long gone. I'm now stuck with 3 drug-crazed losers like myself, 2 of which can barely put an audible sentence together, and the third one has very few teeth. And we are engaged in some deep and fascinating discussion about the benefits of astroturf over natural grass. And the booze and the drugs are starting to run out, and the frantic search begins for more, because at this point I'm in that frenzy. I got the taste and I can't stop. And then the next thought that comes to me is that I'm hearing the birds chirp. I hated those birds. Still hate them. And I'm looking out the window, and I'm so fried that my brain has become astroturf. And I'm seeing normal people going to work and starting their day, but not me. I'm at some place that I don't want to be with people that I don't like. And one of them is really starting to bug me. I'm thinking about decking him and knocking out the one good tooth he's got left. And I'm sensing the trouble's not too far off, but the thought of stopping and going home at this point is way too painful, so I just keep going and stick it out. And finally, that last thought that comes to me, I wake up alone to the awful realization that the nightmare happened again. And I'm physically sick, but I'm mentally tormented, and I got nowhere else to turn. And the thought starts to creep into my head that being dead has got to be better than living the way I'm living. And ironically, that's the very place that alcohol took me that got me into this program in the first place. The jumping off place. So thanks to you people, that glorified fantasy that comes to me takes me right to the end. And why shouldn't it? That's the way it happens for me every time. I don't want a little wine with dinner, and I'm not looking for a couple of beers after the gaming. I want it all. I've always wanted it all. And I've learned that not only can I stay away from that first drink, but I can live a life without alcohol today that I never ever dreamed possible. I spent so much time trying to get from point A to point B my whole life that I missed everything in between. And for me, part of that joy of living that we talk about in here is experiencing all those little things along the way of the journey. Little things. Whether it be sitting in a restaurant overlooking the Eiffel Tower in Paris like I was 2 weeks ago with my wife, and thinking to myself, God, look how far you brought me. Or taking my little 7-year-old to the doctor for his checkup for school, and he's the coolest kid in the world, he's so attached to me. And the doctor runs all these tests and can sort of predict certain attributes about how he's going to be in the future. She says, do you have any more questions? I said, no. Brian says, I do. Am I going to grow up to be like my dad? And I become such a mush and get a lump in my throat because I know that I'm experiencing emotion and feelings today that I never ever knew my whole life, that I never ever got out of the bottle. These are real moments that I can cherish and file away, not some moment lost in some alcoholic haze. But I can't do this alone, and I don't want to do this alone. I need to practice the principles that this program gives to me, like patience and tolerance, so that when my 4-year-old is giving me a 20-minute dissertation on every single one of his Pokemon cards, that I have God's good grace to help me seem interested in all that, you know? And I swear today, I can look into my little 2-year-old's eyes and see the hand of God at work right in front of me, as plain as the day. And I'm not saying that you have to have kids to experience the joy of living, but for me, it's a wonderful, wonderful age. It's just become so clear to me today that God knows far better what I need and where I belong than I do. And I've got no more fight left with that. He has allowed me to find you people, to find recovery, and I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.
Participate. If your primary problem is other than alcoholism, we think it would also be helpful for you to contact an anonymous organization which more specifically deals with your addiction. Our literature person, Stephanie, has a list of such groups with their phone numbers. In any case, we hope that what you learn here may be helpful to your recovery and/or understanding. Ricky will read the preamble.
Hi, I'm Ricky, powerless of alcohol. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Thanks.
Please join me in the serenity prayer. To accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Bobby will read the steps.
Hi, I'm Bobby, alcoholic.
Hi, Bobby.
These are the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. 1. We admit we are powerless over alcohol and that our lives have become unmanageable. 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7. Humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8. Made a list of all persons we have harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9. Made direct amends to such people, wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, properly admitted it. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Thank you.
Robbie will read his additions.
My name is Robbie, and I'm an alcoholic. This is the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. Each member of Alcoholics Anonymous is but a small part of a great whole. AA must continue to live, or most of us will surely die. Surely. As I was saying, 1. Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on AA unity. 2. For our group's purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. 3. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. 4. Each group should be autonomous, except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. 5. Each group has but one primary purpose, to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. 6. An AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. 7. Each AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. 8. Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. 9. AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. 10. Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues, hence the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. 11. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. 12. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all of our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities.
The format of this meeting is 2 10-minute speakers followed by our information break, and then our main speaker who will speak for 30 minutes. Our first 10-minute speaker is Adam.
My name is Adam. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. And this is pretty bizarre. But, just to get right to it, I can remember having my first drink when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And it was at a family function. And I can't really remember how drunk I got or what happened. I can just remember picking up that glass. And then I was with my cousin. And I turned to him and I said, "Let's race." And I can tell you between that time and about 4 months ago, drinking was always a race. And finishing that cup was something I had to do the quickest and I had to drink the most of. And it just got me to where I had to be. Between that time and after the first drink, I grew up in a nice house, a little dysfunction going on. My father was a compulsive gambler, my brother was a compulsive gambler, and I saw, these people were my role models. And for a little while, that's how I wanted to be. I looked at life as like a game, looked how I could get over on somebody. This is how I was, basically taught. In my eyes, I was definitely taught better than that, but this is the way I looked to view things. And to skip a little forward, or a little ahead, my drinking really took off when I entered high school. I was 14 years old, I was an overweight kid, and my world was very small. It basically revolved around me, and I always thought didn't fit in, and I always felt bad for myself, that my life was going nowhere. And I can remember the first party in high school. It was like I had arrived. It was a keg. I did a keg stand. I did some other stuff that was going around in the party. And, people knew who I was. And that's basically what I wanted from that point on and after. And, I basically coasted through high school. I did pretty well. I can tell you today I'm a above average kid in terms of smartness, and it was easy, you know, like I was able to party basically as much as I wanted, which at first was the weekends, and then, you know, it was pretty much a daily thing, cutting out of school and getting a 40 or getting some other stuff, and just, you know, that's how the cool guys live their lives. And, you know, after high school, I went to college, and I ended up going to a school that everyone from my high school went to. And it was the thing where I can remember going to the guidance counselor, and I'm sitting there with my head down, and he's like, "So you going to Albany?" And I said, "I guess so." And it was that quick and that easy. And in my mind, I had aspired to go to a better school in my mind again. But it was just easy, and, you know, he did all the paperwork for me, and that's how it was going to be. And I should have known there was something wrong, because the first weekend I was up there, which was orientation, you know, I went through all the orientation process with my mother and a couple of friends. And that night, about 6 o'clock, we ended up leaving, finding a few fraternity guys, and I woke up the next morning at about 7:30 on a lawn. My friend standing over me saying, "Get up, animal, you did it again, let's go." And I went, you know, to the next orientation, and, you know, like everything was all right. And from that point on, that's how my college career went. You know, I ended up there, I was there for about a semester and a half, and I can tell you, after that semester and a half, I was basically thrown over this invisible line that is talked about so often in this program. Because at about 8 a.m. on a cold night, on a cold morning, 2 cops and an ambulance driver came to my door and said, "Son, you're coming with me. You're coming with us." And I ended up in a state psychiatric hospital. And growing up the way I did and partying the way I did with the people I did, this was a whole new world for me. And it was a scary world for me. And for the next 10 days, I would go through a process that for the next 7 years I would call hell. And I would, you know, just feed off of every time I drank, and they were wrong, and they spited me. And you know what? They said that day that I had what was called a psychotic break. And today I can tell you I had a psychotic break. I lost touch with reality. And I would later find out through my drinking and drugging that when I went too far, my brain just snapped. And, you know, I was introduced to AA at the young age of 18, and it was a lesson, you know. It was something I didn't want to, someplace I didn't want to be, words I didn't want to hear, and, you know, I was told, do this, do that, and that's why I did it, because basically I was told, this is what you got to do. If you want to live in this house, you're going to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And if you want to live in this house, you're going to come home at this time, you know. And I cleaned up pretty nicely, you know. I got healthy again, I started working out, and everything was going okay. But I was still hanging out in the same places, watching my friends get drunk, and just saying, "You guys, I can't wait to be back." And after like 87 days, I was back. And I picked up some more substances along the way that I got really into. And today I can thank God for those substances, because I know they brought me to this place a lot quicker. But I still had to endure a lot more pain. I ended up having one of these psychotic breaks about 3 years after that point. And I ended up in another hospital, then into a rehab, and then I was actually in Florida, and I became a ward of the state of Florida. So in those 3 years, I was owned by the state of New York and the state of Florida. You know, and again, I didn't want to believe that this was my fate, that I had to be in this church and talk to you people, and this was going to help me, you know. And I went through a few meetings, and I actually, you know, I guess I white-knuckled it, because for a good year, I stayed clean. And when I say that, I stayed clean because I didn't adhere to the basis of what this program is about. And basically, you know, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I never opened it. And the 12 steps, which, you know, I'm doing today, but I didn't really want to know from it back then. And, but again, I cleaned up pretty nicely, and I got a nice apartment in the city, and I was working in the city, and I was okay. There was nothing wrong. But I can tell you, I still felt out of place, and I still had to be the center of attention, and I still wanted people to know who I was. And about 7 months ago, this urge came over me, and it was one of the scariest, things that I've been through, because for like a good 3 to 4 months straight, I was praying for death. And I can remember a night standing on the platform of Grand Central Station, just really wanting to throw myself in, and I couldn't, And I ended up in the Hamptons that weekend. It was Memorial Day weekend, and I had about 2 hours sleep in a week span, and I just lost it one more time. But this time, I knew what was going on. Although I could not catch my thoughts, I knew this was it. And I can remember laying on the floor. My friends had to lock me up in the bedroom and basically tell me when to go to the bathroom, tell me to shower, tell me to eat, tell me to drink. And I remember looking up at my friend Greg and saying, I did it again. And, but for some reason, this would be my moment of clarity, and I ended up back at my mother's house that Monday, and I woke up to a drug counselor in my face telling me, this has got to be it, and he wanted to send me away, and I said, I'm not going away, I'm going to AA. And that's what happened, I was dropped off, or I took a cab back to the city that Wednesday, and I remember going to a meeting that Wednesday night, and I went in late, I went on the cigarette break, and I remember a guy coming up to me just to ask me what meetings I'd go to, and I remember him saying, don't go to the Atlantic Group. They're big thumpers, and, they're just crazy anarchists, and, something with that respect. And I remember being that kind of guy, just having to know what he didn't like about that. And I thank God today that I was like that, or that was part of my alcoholism, having to, test what other people said. But I went to another meeting on Thursday, another meeting Friday, Saturday. I didn't really get hooked up. And Saturday I even shared that, I wanted to kill myself and this and that. And a guy from this meeting actually put out his hand, and that prompted me to come back, And Sunday, I guess I was, God was with me, and that was the day I've been introduced to my sponsor, and a bunch of guys, which today are like an extended family, and basically, I was told this is going to be your sponsor, this is what you're going to do, and in a nutshell, they basically told me to pray, thank God every day, ask that it's His will, not mine, ask to remove the desire of self, and that's what I've been doing to this day forward. And I can tell you, this has been the happiest 3 months of my life. And just to tell you that my mind is at peace today, and I can actually stand here and talk to you guys, and that's exactly what I'm doing, is talking. There's not another thought going on in my mind, and it's really, truly a miracle, because I haven't had this feeling ever in my life, or at least I can't remember. So thank you.
Our next 10-minute speaker is Gina.
Hi everyone, my name is Gina, I'm an alcoholic. I just want to take a moment to really take in everyone in this church, because the first time I had a chance to speak for the Atlanta group, and by the way, I just want to add that I'm very grateful to be speaking for the Atlanta group right now. But the first time that I spoke for the Atlanta group, I was a new member, and I had 2 years sobriety at the time. I certainly wasn't working the program as is outlined in the big book. It was Gina's program. But I remember really rushing through the things that I maybe thought I wanted to tell you, and I was very nervous. And I'm also told that when you're nervous, it means you're thinking about yourself, and I've learned today that it's really not about me. You know, some things I have to be selfish about, but it's not all about me. I'd like to think sometimes that it is, but it's not. For the newcomer, I'll tell you what it was like, what happened, and how I've changed. I grew up in New York City. It was an alcoholic environment. My stepfather drank. My father, for 4, drank. My mother was married 4 times. Each of her husbands had a drinking problem. They're self-diagnosed, but I think it's a fair assessment to say that they all drank, and I suffered because of that. And I didn't like drinking, you know, seeing it in growing up. I didn't like it at all. And so I stayed away from it, but somewhere in high school, all the kids were talking about it, and so I thought, okay, this is, you know, I want to be a part of, and I drank. And, you know, I basically compromised my principles to be, you know, to be a part of a group. And that happened in college. And certainly when I later got married, I found the right partner that drank and did other substances just the way I did. And it was a big mess. It was the 80s, you know, and everything was, you know, for me it was rock and roll, it was nightclubs, it was believing that I was an actress, but, you know, like many, I was waiting tables, bartending, and, you know, flitzing about clubs and thinking that, you know, I'm going to get discovered and this is going to be great, and, you know, this fantasy land of alcohol and people that I'd meet, and really superficial conversations and things like that. My drinking my drinking escalated in about, I want to say 1989. My grandparents had passed. My mother was diagnosed with brain cancer, and I used all of these things that happened as an excuse to continue to drink. Not to mention my childhood, where I suffered certain types of abuse in growing up. So I used everything as an excuse to drink, and I was really just addicted because behaviorally, it just went hand in hand that I should drink and I should escape the demons. So, you know, when my mother got sick, I definitely progressed. And, you know, like, I just want to backtrack for just a second. You know, I went to college for 2 years, and I was studying acting, and, you know, I had dreams. But everything took a back seat to drinking and partying. You know, that word was big. Drinking and partying. So everything took a back seat. If I could meet a celebrity, if I could go someplace, if I could do something, it all took a back seat. So when my mother got sick and I was working in nightclubs, you know, I used that as an excuse. I later, my mother passed. I got married. I got married because I didn't know how to take care of myself, and I thought this alcoholic could take care of me better than I could take care of myself. And so we moved to Florida, and it's really easy to drink in Florida. Quarter drafts, $2 margaritas, all the chicken wings you could have. It's terrific. So you could get sunny, and it's this fake facade of drinking and madness. And it was that experience being in Florida and being out of New York, which I love the city. But I also thought the city was my problem. I have to get out of here. You know, it's the city's fault that I'm the way I am. So everything took a nosedive in Florida. And to make a long story short, I've had a couple of bottoms, but there was no bottom more serious than the one that I had in Florida that brought me to these rooms. And I was aware of these rooms from a very early age because of my stepfather, and I did go to Alateen, so I kind of knew it. I danced around, and I thought maybe I had a problem, but I had a wicked bottom in Florida. I was missing in action for 3 days, and I always prided myself on always being able to maintain a job, and I didn't show up for work, bartending. I didn't show up for my bartending job, so there was trouble. And anyway, my father was in the, my biological father was in the program at this point for 5 years, and you know, my husband told me, he said, I think you have a problem, and in my alcoholic, you know, mind, I have a problem. You have a problem, but I'll go get help. You know, yeah, I'll talk to him. So I did. I sought my father out, and I went to my first, what I consider my first AA meeting in Miami, Florida. I can't remember what it was like to pick up the white chip, but I did pick up a white chip, and I don't remember what was said. I don't remember how I felt. It dumbfounds me when people say that they remember exactly the moment and somebody's name and the guy that greeted them at the door. I can't, for the life of me. It was like, it took about 2 weeks before I could see. And when I could see, I was really amazed that the sky was blue, you know, like, and the clouds were white, and I didn't know how much drinking had clouded just my vision. Anyway, I ended up, you know, there were suggestions in this program, don't make any major moves your first year, but I couldn't stay in my situation. I couldn't be married. I stayed sober in Florida for about a year, and decided to move back to New York to pursue my original ambitions, to be an actress. And I was back in New York about a year, and I had a relapse of one day. And I immediately came back into the rooms. And it was at that time, well, at that time that I will just say that I was not making meetings. I started to do things my way. I did not have a program. I did not have a sponsor. I was not connected at all, even though I was very, and everything I have in my life today is purely because of my prayers, this program, my relationships with people here, everything. And my life, compared to 7 years ago, and when I tell you, when I was missing in action for 3 days, where I was, I mean, it was hell on earth. So to come to not have gratitude, and I know I have to wrap this up, and there's so much I want to say, but to not have gratitude and to just do things my own way and to slip and slide. Anyway, I came back, and I was back 2 years, and I heard some people speak from the Atlanta group at that time at the 79th Street workshop. My apartment had, I happened to go to this meeting, my apartment had been robbed, and instead of like reacting and I'm going to go out and drink or do anything, you know, my smart feet, you know, they know to go to a meeting, and it was there that I met my sponsor, Arisa, and I'm happy to say that, you know, I maintain my sobriety today through coming to these meetings, through all the help that my sponsor gives me, and through working the steps that are outlined in the big book. And I'm on my 8th step, which took me forever to finish because I'm a procrastinator, but I know today that the answers lie within those steps. And I have to really wrap this up. I just want to say that my life today, people say beyond your wildest dreams. I'm doing everything that I always wanted to do. It's about taking action, and you know, I can only you can't help yourself just sitting down. You have to, it just doesn't come to you. You have to do the work, and you have to take the steps, and if that means just doing the next right thing on a day-to-day basis, that's what you do. And that's really all I can say. I'm very grateful today. Thanks so much.
We'll now have an